I've always been a sucker for adventure, but I never thought it would lead me here. Sitting in a dimly lit cabin in the Icelandic wilderness, questioning my sanity and wondering if I'll live to see another sunrise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. Back when this was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. It was Olga's idea, really. My girlfriend of 3 years had always dreamed of seeing the northern lights, and when she found an unbelievably cheap Airbnb listing in a small village near Vitarvatn, she was practically bouncing off the walls with excitement. "Come on, Jake," she'd said, her blue eyes sparkling. "When are we ever going to get another chance like this?" Couldn't argue with her logic or her enthusiasm. So, 2 weeks later, we found ourselves on a tiny propeller plane, descending towards an airstrip that looked more like a gravelly back road than an actual runway. The village of Arbaki wasn't much to look at. A handful of colorful houses dotted the landscape, their paint faded and chipped from years of harsh Icelandic winters. The few locals we passed on our way to the Airbnb regarded us with a mixture of curiosity and, was that concern? Our rental car, a beat-up Subaru that had seen better days, struggled up the winding dirt road leading to our cabin. As we crested the final hill, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the frigid air outside. The cabin stood alone, a weathered wooden structure that seemed to grow out of the rocky landscape like some kind of misshapen tree. Thick forests loomed on 3 sides, their branches reaching towards the sky like gnarled fingers. To the south, the glassy surface of Vitarvatn reflected the overcast sky, creating an illusion of endless gray. "It's quaint," Olga said, her voice faltering slightly. I could tell she was trying to maintain her excitement, but something about the place had dampened her spirits. I forced a smile. "Hey, it's all part of the adventure, right?" We grabbed our bags and made our way to the front door. A gust of wind whipped around us, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else, something acrid and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. The key was hidden under a loose floorboard, just as the owner had promised. As I turned it in the lock, the door creaked open with a sound that sent shivers down my spine. The interior of the cabin was unexpected. While the outside looked like it had been abandoned for years, the inside was immaculately clean and surprisingly modern. A plush couch faced a stone fireplace, and the small kitchen gleamed with new appliances. "Wow," Olga breathed, her earlier apprehension seemingly forgotten. "This is actually really nice." I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the floorboards seemed to groan under our weight, or how the shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker than they should be. As Olga explored the cabin, oohing and ahhing over the decor, I found myself drawn to a small bookshelf in the corner. Most of the titles were in Icelandic, their spines cracked and worn with age. But one book stood out. Thin volume bound in dark leather with no title or author listed. I reached for it, my fingers barely brushing the spine when a sharp crack of thunder made me jump. Outside, the sky had darkened considerably, and fat droplets of rain began to pelt the windows. "Looks like we got here just in time," Olga said, coming up behind me and wrapping her arms around my waist. "Want to light a fire and open that bottle of wine we brought?" I smiled and turned to kiss her, pushing my unease to the back of my mind. We were here to relax and have fun. After all, what could possibly go wrong? As I built the fire and Olga uncorked the wine, neither of us noticed the way the shadows seemed to shift and dance in the corners of the room. Nor did we hear the faint whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. A sound that might have been the wind, or might have been something far more sinister. "Welcome," it seemed to say. "We've been waiting for you." The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We cooked a simple dinner of pasta and local fish, the unfamiliar spices filling the cabin with an aromatic haze. As we ate, Olga chatted excitedly about our plans for the week. Hiking, visiting hot springs, and of course hunting for the elusive northern light. "I read that the locals have all sorts of folklore about the lights," she said, her eyes gleaming with interest. They say they're the spirits of the dead, dancing in the sky. Forced to chuckle. Let's hope we don't run into any of those spirits. After dinner, we settled onto the couch, the crackling fire casting long shadows across the room. The wind outside had picked up, howling around the eaves of the cabin like a wounded animal. I pulled Olga closer, trying to focus on the warmth of her body rather than the growing sense of unease in the pit of my stomach. "Tell me a story," Olga murmured, her head resting on my chest. "Something scary. It's perfect for a night like that." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to feed the creeping dread that had been building since we arrived. But Olga looked up at me with those big blue eyes, and I found myself giving in. "All right," I said, racking my brain for a suitable tale. "Have you ever heard of the Icelandic hidden people?" Olga shook her head, snuggling closer. "Well, legend has it that there are invisible beings living all around us in Iceland. They look just like humans, but they can only be seen by those with the gift, or by those they choose to reveal themselves." As I spoke, fire seemed to dim, shadows in the room growing deeper. I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, there was nothing there. They say the hidden people live in rocks and hills, and that they don't take kindly to humans disturbing their homes. There are stories of construction projects being sabotaged, of workers falling ill, or machines breaking down mysteriously. A loud crack from the fire made us both jump. For a moment, I thought I saw a face in the flames, angular and inhuman, with eyes that burned with an otherworldly light. But then I blinked, and it was gone. Some people even claim to have been invited into the hidden people's homes. Continued, my voice barely above a whisper now. They described feasts of unimaginable luxury, music that makes your very soul want to dance. But there's always a catch. Time moves differently in their world, and what feels like a few hours can be years in our world. People have gone missing for decades, only to return without having aged a day. As I finished speaking, an eerie silence fell over the cabin. Even the wind seemed to have died down. Olga shivered against me. "Maybe that wasn't the best bedtime story," he said with a nervous laugh. Forced to smile. "Yeah, sorry about that. It's just a silly legend though, nothing to worry about." But as we got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that by telling that story, I had somehow invited something into our little cabin. Something old and patient and hungry. That night, I dreamed of dancing lights in the sky, of shadowy figures moving just out of sight, and of a voice calling my name from the depths of the lake. When I woke with a start in the middle of the night, heart pounding, I could have sworn I saw Olga standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me with unblinking eyes. But when I blinked and looked again, she was asleep beside me, her chest rising and falling with steady breaths. It was just a dream, I told myself as I tried to go back to sleep. Just a dream, and nothing more. But deep down, I knew that our adventure in Iceland was only just beginning, and that the true horrors were still waiting to reveal themselves. I woke to the sound of scratching. At first, I thought it was just the wind against the cabin's weathered exterior, but as I lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, I realized it was coming from inside the room. Steady, rhythmic, scratch, scratch, scratch. I rolled over reaching for Olga, but my hand met cold, empty sheets. My heart rate quickened as I sat up, squinting into the gloom. "Olga?" The scratching stopped abruptly. Then, from the far corner of the room, I heard her voice. "I'm here, Jake." I fumbled for the bedside lamp, my fingers clumsy with sleep and a growing sense of unease. When the light finally clicked on, I had to bite back a scream. Olga was crouched in the corner, her back to me. She was wearing the white nightgown she'd packed for the trip, but it was now streaked with dirt and what looked disturbingly like blood. Her long blonde hair hung in tangled clumps around her face. "Olga, what the hell?" I managed to choke out. "Are you okay?" Slowly, so slowly it made my skin crawl, she turned to face me. Her blue eyes, usually so full of warmth and life, were dull and unfocused. A trickle of dark fluid, please let it be dirt, not blood, ran from the corner of her mouth. "I'm fine, Jake," she said, her voice oddly flat. "I was just hungry." It was then that I noticed the deep gouges in the wooden floorboards where she'd been crouching, as if she'd been clawing at the floor like an animal. I was out of the bed in an instant, crossing the room to her. "Jesus, Olga, your hands." Her fingernails were torn and bloody, splinters embedded in the soft flesh of her fingertips. She looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time, a small frown creasing her forehead. "Oh," she said, "I didn't notice." I helped her to her feet, trying to ignore the way she seemed to twitch and jerk, her movements unnatural and jerky. "Come on, let's get you cleaned up." As I led her to the bathroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Olga had always been a sound sleeper. She'd never sleepwalked or had night terrors before. Was it the stress of travel? The altitude? Or was it something else entirely? I sat her on the edge of the tub and began to gently clean her hands with warm water and soap. She remained eerily silent, her gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. When I finally worked up the courage to look behind me, there was nothing there but the plain white wall of the bathroom. "Olga?" I said softly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "What happened? What were you doing?" For a long moment she didn't respond. Then slowly her eyes focused on mine. "I heard them calling, Jake, from under the floor. They're so hungry." A chill ran down my spine. "Who's hungry, Olga? There's no one here but us." A smile spread across her face, too wide, showing too many teeth. "The hidden people, Jake? Remember the story you told? They're here. They've always been here." I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her she was just having a bad dream, when a loud thump from the main room of the cabin made us both jump. Sounded like something heavy had fallen, or like something was trying to break through the floor. Olga's head snapped towards the sound, her whole body going rigid. Then, before I could stop her, she was on her feet and running. Cursed, scrambling after her, but she was inhumanly fast. By the time I made it back to the bedroom, she was already disappearing down the narrow stairs to the main floor. "Olga, wait." I took the stairs 2 at a time, my heart pounding in my ears. When I reached the bottom, I froze. The main room of the cabin was in chaos. Books had been pulled from the shelves and scattered across the floor. The couch cushions were overturned, stuffing spilling out as if some animal had been at them. And there, in the center of it all, stood Olga. She was perfectly still, her back to me, facing the stone fireplace. As I watched, paralyzed with fear and confusion, she slowly raised her arms out to her side. "Do you hear them, Jake?" she whispered, her voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "They're singing." And then, to my horror, she began to rise off the ground. Inch by inch, defying every law of physics I knew, Olga levitated until she was a full foot off the floor. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out, flee this cursed cabin and never look back. But I couldn't leave her. Whatever was happening, whatever had taken hold of the woman I loved, I had to try to save her. "Olga," I said, taking a cautious step forward. "Olga, please, come down, you're scaring me." She turned in midair, her movements fluid and unnaturally graceful. Her eyes, when they met mine, were black as pitch. "Don't be afraid, Jake," she said, and her voice echoed strangely, as if multiple people were speaking at once. "They just want to play." Suddenly, every light in the cabin went out. In the pitch darkness, I heard a sound that will haunt me for the rest of my days, the skittering of countless unseen things, moving across the floor, the walls, the ceiling. I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any source of light. When I finally managed to turn on the flashlight, I almost wished I hadn't. The beam illuminated Olga, now standing directly in front of me. Her skin was pale as milk, dark veins visible beneath the surface. Her hair writhed around her head as if blown by some unfelt wind. And her smile, God, her smile was impossibly wide, stretching literally from ear to ear. "Welcome to the dance, Jake," she said, and then she was moving towards me, feet not touching the ground, her arms outstretched as if to embrace me. I stumbled backwards, tripping over the scattered debris on the floor. As I fell, I caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows behind Olga. Twisted, inhuman shapes, that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. My back hit the front door. I scrabbled for the handle, my eyes never leaving the approaching figure of what used to be my girlfriend. Just as her ice-cold fingers brushed my cheek, I managed to wrench the door open. I tumbled out into the pre-dawn chill, gasping for air. Behind me, I heard Olga's laughter, high and wild and utterly inhuman. "You can't run, Jake," her voice called from the darkness of the cabin. "They're everywhere. They're in the earth, in the air, in the water. They're in your blood now, part of the dance." I ran. God help me. I ran into the woods surrounding the cabin, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like jelly. When I finally stopped, bent double and gasping for air, I realized two terrible things. First, I had no idea where I was. The dense forest looked the same in every direction, no sign of the cabin or the road visible. And second, the sun was starting to rise, illuminating a thick, unnatural mist that was rolling in from all sides. As I watched, paralyzed with fear, I saw shapes moving in that mist. Humanoid but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that no human body could match. From somewhere in the distance, I heard Olga's voice carried on the wind. "Come back, Jake. The hidden people want to meet you." I knew then that our vacation had become a nightmare from which there might be no waking. Whatever had taken hold of Olga, whatever forces we had unwittingly stirred up, they weren't going to let us go easily. As the mist closed in around me, bringing with it whispers and laughter that no human throat could produce, I realized that this was only the beginning. The real horror was yet to come. I don't know how long I wandered in those mist-shrouded woods. Time seemed to lose all meaning, stretching and contracting like a living thing. The sun never fully rose, trapped in an eternal, sickly dawn that cast long, writhing shadows among the trees. Eventually, exhausted and disoriented, I found myself back at the cabin. It loomed before me, a dark silhouette against the gray sky. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to keep running until I collapsed, but I knew it was pointless. Whatever had taken hold here, whatever had possessed Olga, it wouldn't let me escape so easily. With trembling hands, I pushed open the front door. The interior was dark, the air thick with the coppery scent of blood, and something else, something older and fouler. "Olga?" I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. A giggle echoed from upstairs, high-pitched and childlike. It was Olga's voice, but not her laugh. Never her laugh. I climbed the stairs, each step creaking ominously beneath my feet. The bedroom door was ajar, pale light spilling out into the hallway. I pushed it open, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Olga sat in the center of the bed, her legs folded beneath her. She was completely naked, her pale skin covered in intricate patterns drawn in what looked horribly like blood. Her hair hung in matted clumps around her face, and when she looked up at me, her eyes were solid black. "Welcome home, Jake," she said, her voice a horrifying mixture of her own and something ancient and inhuman. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, my back hitting the doorframe. "Olga, please," I begged. "What's happening to you, to us?" She cocked her head to one side, the movement unnaturally fluid. "Happening? Oh, Jake, it's already happened. We're part of them now. Part of the dance." As she spoke, I noticed movement behind her. The shadows on the wall were shifting, forming into humanoid shapes that writhed and twisted in impossible ways. I blinked hard, praying it was just my exhausted mind playing tricks on me, but when I opened my eyes, the shadow figures were still there, and they were getting clearer. Olga stood up on the bed, her movements jerky and puppet-like. "They want to show you, Jake. They want you to see." Before I could react, she launched herself at me with inhuman speed. Her body slammed into mine, sending us both tumbling down the stairs. We hit the bottom hard, and for a moment, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the main room. Olga was straddling me, her face inches from mine. Her breath smelled of rot and decay. "Open your eyes, Jake," she hissed. "Really open them." And then, to my horror, she began to peel back her own eyelids. But instead of stopping, the skin kept coming, peeling away from her face like a mask. tried to scream to push her off, but my body wouldn't respond. I could only watch in mute terror as Olga's face fell away, revealing something underneath that my mind wouldn't comprehend. It was as if reality itself was tearing, the familiar features of my girlfriend giving way to a writhing mass of shadows and teeth and eyes that shouldn't exist. And yet, somehow, I knew it was still Olga. Or what Olga had become. "Do you see now?" The thing wearing Olga's skin asks. "Do you understand?" And God help me, I did. In that moment, I saw beyond the veil of our reality. I saw the hidden people, the creatures that lurked just out of sight. They were beautiful and terrible, ancient beyond imagining, and hungry. So hungry. I saw how thin the barrier between our world and theirs truly was. How the northern lights were really the after-images of their movements, bleeding through into our realm. How they had been watching us, waiting for the right moment to break through. And I saw how Olga and I had been chosen. How our arrival at this cursed cabin had been the final key to unlocking the door between worlds. The vision lasted an eternity, and no time at all. When it faded, I found myself able to move again. Scrambled backward, putting distance between myself and the thing that had been Olga. It watched me with amusement. "Running won't help, Jake. You're already part of us, you just don't know it yet." As if to prove her point, she suddenly darted forward, moving faster than any human possibly could. But instead of attacking me, she ran straight up the wall, defying gravity as she scurried across the ceiling like some monstrous insect. I watched in horrified fascination as she contorted her body in impossible ways, bones cracking and reforming as she twisted herself into shapes that should have been fatal. All the while, she laughed. That high, childlike giggle that was so wrong coming from her mouth. "Join us, Jake," she called from her perch on the ceiling. "Dance with us." I made a break for the door, but before I could reach it, Olga dropped down in front of me. She moved like a marionette with tangled strings, her limbs bending at unnatural angles. "You can't leave," she said, her voice echoing strangely. "The hidden people have such wonderful games to play." And then, to my utter disbelief and horror, she began to do something I can only describe as turning herself inside out. It was as if her skin was becoming translucent, revealing the writhing, shadowy mass beneath. I caught glimpses of organs that were not human, of bones that shifted and changed shape. I couldn't take it anymore. With a scream of pure terror, I shoved past her and burst out of the cabin. I ran blindly into the misty woods, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But no matter how far or fast I ran, I couldn't escape the sound of Olga's laughter, nor the whispers of the hidden people that seemed to come from the very air around me. As I ran, I began to notice strange things. The trees seemed to move, their branches reaching out as if to grab me. The ground beneath my feet felt soft and yielding, like it might swallow me up at any moment. And everywhere I looked, I caught glimpses of dark shapes flitting just at the edge of my vision. I don't know how long I ran, hours, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning in this nightmare realm. But eventually, exhausted beyond measure, I stumbled and fell. As I lay there on the forest floor, gasping for breath, I heard footsteps approaching. Soft, measured steps that could only belong to one person. Olga emerged from the mist. She was no longer even pretending to be human. Her body was a constantly shifting mass of shadows and light, vaguely humanoid but wrong in ways I couldn't begin to describe. Only her eyes remained recognizable, 2 points of deep blue in a face that was no longer a face. "Oh, Jake," she said, and her voice was a chorus of whispers. "Why do you keep running? Don't you want to be with me? Don't you want to be part of something greater?" As she spoke, the mist around us began to coalesce, forming into shapes that my mind recoiled from. The hidden people were revealing themselves at last, and I knew that once I truly saw them, there would be no going back. Olga reached out a hand, or what passed for a hand in her new form, towards me. "Join us, Jake. Be with me forever. All you have to do is say yes." I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I thought of the Olga I had known, the woman I had loved. I thought of our life together, all our plans and dreams, and I thought of the horror that had consumed her, that was now offering to consume me as well. In that moment, teetering on the edge of an abyss I could barely comprehend, I made my choice. I opened my eyes, looked directly into the swirling vortex that had once been Olga's face, and said, I opened my eyes, looked directly into the swirling vortex that had once been Olga's face, and said, no. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with finality. For a moment, everything was still. Then the forest erupted into chaos. Shadows surrounding us writhed and twisted, taking on monstrous forms. The ground beneath my feet began to undulate like the surface of a stormy sea, and Olga, or the thing that had been Olga, let out a scream that shattered reality itself. Her body began to shift and change, growing larger, more monstrous. Limbs sprouted from limbs, eyes opened where no eyes should be. She was becoming something beyond comprehension, a living nightmare that threatened to consume everything. You can't say no, Jake, her voice boomed, now a cacophony of 1,000 screaming souls. You're already part of us. You've always been part of us. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to run, but there was nowhere to go. The forest had become a writhing mass of shadows and teeth, closing in on all sides. I could feel the hidden people pressing against the barriers of reality, trying to break through. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I saw it, a glimmer of light, barely visible through the twisting shadows. Without thinking, I lunged for it, my hand closing around something small and cold. It was the key to the cabin, the one we'd found under the loose floorboard what felt like a lifetime ago. As my fingers touched it, a jolt of energy surged through me. Suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I turned to face the monstrosity that had once been my girlfriend. You're right, Olga, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I am part of this, but not in the way you think. Before the creature could react, I plunged the key into my own chest. Pain exploded through me, white hot and all-consuming. But with the pain came clarity. I could feel the power of this place, the ancient magic that bound the hidden people to our world, and I could feel how to unravel it. As blood poured from my wound, I began to speak. The words weren't mine. They were older than language itself. Primal sound that resonated with the very fabric of reality. With each syllable, I could feel the bonds weakening, the veil between worlds growing thinner. The creature that had been Olga lunged at me, its form shifting and changing with each movement. But it was too late. With a final guttural cry, I completed the incantation. The world exploded. Reality itself seemed to fracture. Shards of what was and what could be swirling around us in a maelstrom of cosmic energy. I could see glimpses of other worlds, other times, prehistoric beasts roaming vast plains, futuristic cities gleaming under alien suns, and things so strange I couldn't begin to describe them. And through it all, I could see the hidden people. They were being torn from our world, pulled back into whatever dark dimension they had come from. They fought against it, their inhuman screams echoing across realities, but it was futile. The creature that had been Olga was the last to go. As the vortex of energy pulled at her monstrous form, I caught a final glimpse of the woman I had loved. For just a moment, her eyes cleared, and I saw recognition there. Fear. Regret. Jake? She whispered, her voice her own again. I'm sorry. And then she was gone, swallowed up by the collapsing portal between worlds. The maelstrom of energy intensified, and I felt myself being pulled apart at the molecular level. Every atom of my being was on fire, scattered across a million realities. I was everywhere and nowhere, every when and never when. In that moment of cosmic awareness, I understood. The cabin, the hidden people, Olga and I, we had all been part of something larger. Cosmic dance that had been playing out since the dawn of time. And now, with my sacrifice, the dance was changing. As the last of the energy dissipated, I found myself back in the forest. But it was different now. The oppressive atmosphere was gone, replaced by the natural beauty of the Icelandic wilderness. The sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. I looked down at my chest, expecting to see the gaping wound where I'd plunged the key. But there was nothing there. Not even a scar. For a moment, I wondered if it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and the unfamiliar environment. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, at the base of a nearby tree, was a small pile of dirt, and half buried in that dirt was a human tooth. Trembling hands, I dug into the soft earth, more teeth, fragments of bone, and scraps of familiar fabric, remains of Olga's nightgown. Truth hit me like a physical blow. Olga was gone. She had been gone for days, maybe even since that first night. The thing I had been interacting with, the monster she had become, it had all been a manifestation of the hidden people's power. They had used her death, her decomposing body, as an anchor to our world. And I had been their unwitting pawn, my grief and confusion feeding their strength. As the full weight of what had happened settled over me, I began to laugh. It was a broken, hysterical sound that echoed through the now peaceful forest. I laughed until I cried, and then I cried until I had no tears left. When I finally pulled myself together, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't leave Olga here, in this cursed place. And I couldn't risk anyone else stumbling upon this cabin and awakening whatever remnants of the hidden people's power might still linger. I spent the next few hours digging a proper grave for Olga, laying her remains to rest as best I could. Then, with grim determination, I returned to the cabin. It looked innocent enough in the morning light, just another quaint vacation rental. But I could feel the wrongness of it, the echo of cosmic horrors that had played out within its walls. I found a can of kerosene in a shed behind the cabin. It didn't take long to douse the interior, making sure to soak the floorboards thoroughly. As I worked, I could have sworn I heard whispers, faint echoes of the hidden people, perhaps, or just the ghosts of my own traumatized psyche. When I was done, I stood at the threshold of the cabin one last time. "I'm sorry, Olga," I whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Then I struck a match and tossed it inside. The flames caught quickly, hungrily devouring the dry wood. I watched as the fire spread, consuming the cabin and all the horrors it contained. Black smoke billowed into the clear morning sky, carrying with it the last vestiges of the hidden people's influence. As the heat became unbearable, I turned and began the long walk back to civilization. I knew that no one would believe my story. How could they? I barely believed it myself. But as I made my way down the winding road, away from the burning cabin and the grave of the woman I had loved, I swore I could hear music on the wind. Haunting, beautiful melody that spoke of ancient powers and cosmic dances. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, this wasn't really the end. The hidden people were gone, banished back to whatever dark corner of reality they had come from. But there were other powers out there, other dances yet to be danced. And somewhere, in some reality, Olga was still screaming my name. It's been 6 months since I walked away from that burning cabin in Iceland. 6 months of sleepless nights, jumping at shadows of questioning my own sanity. I'm back home now, trying to piece together some semblance of a normal life. But how do you go back to normal after dancing with cosmic horrors? The official story is that Olga and I were caught in a freak storm. She fell into a ravine, and I, delirious from hypothermia, wandered for days before being found by search and rescue. It's a neat, tidy explanation that everyone seems happy to accept. Everyone except me. I've tried therapy. I'd support groups for those dealing with trauma and loss. But how do you explain to a room full of strangers that your girlfriend was possessed by ancient, otherworldly beings? That you unraveled the fabric of reality to banish them? They'd lock me up and throw away the key. So I smile and nod and tell them what they want to hear. Yes, I'm processing my grief. No, I don't blame myself anymore. Yes, I'm sleeping better these days. Lies, all of it. But necessary lies, tell myself. The truth is too big, too terrible to share. But the truth is a way of seeping through the cracks, no matter how hard you try to patch them. It started small. Flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, gone when I turned to look. Feeling of being watched when I was alone in my apartment. Dreams of vast dark spaces filled with writhing shadows and echoing whispers. I told myself it was just PTSD, my mind's way of processing the unprocessable. But deep down, I knew better. The dance wasn't over. Maybe it would never be over. 3 months after Iceland, I woke in the middle of the night to find my bedroom filled with a shimmering ethereal light. Like the northern lights, but inside, impossible. As I watched, frozen in terror, shapes began to form in the light. Humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, moving with a fluidity that defied physics. And in the center of it all, a familiar figure. Olga, or something wearing her shape. She reached out to me, her fingers elongating into impossible shadowy tendrils. "Jake," she whispered, her voice a chorus of 1,000 souls. "We're still dancing, we'll always be dancing." I screamed then, a primal sound of pure terror. The lights vanished, the figures with them. The damage was done. The barrier between worlds, the one I thought I had sealed, was still permeable. Still thin. After that night, the incidents became more frequent. Objects in my apartment would move on their own. I'd catch glimpses of impossible geometries and reflective surfaces. And always, always, the whispers. Promises of power, of knowledge beyond human comprehension. Threats of what would happen if I refused their call. I tried to run, moved to a new city, changed my name, cut off all contact with my old life. But they always found me. In the end, I realized there was nowhere I could go that they couldn't follow. The hidden people were a part of me now, their essence intertwined with mine in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Brings me to now, to why I'm writing this all down. Yesterday I saw Olga again. Not in a dream, not in some otherworldly vision, but in the flesh. I was walking down a crowded street when I saw her across the road. She looked exactly as she had the day we left for Iceland, all smiles and bright eyes. For a moment, just a moment, I forgot everything that had happened. Called out her name, started to cross the street towards her. And then she changed. It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second she was Olga, my Olga. The next she was something else. Her body elongated, limbs twisting into impossible shapes. Her face split open, revealing a writhing mass of shadows and teeth. And her eyes? God, her eyes were windows into a void so vast and terrible it made my soul shrink. No one else on the street seemed to notice. They walked around the monstrous thing wearing Olga's skin, their eyes sliding past as if it wasn't even there. As if the laws of reality hadn't just been shattered on a busy downtown sidewalk. The thing that wasn't Olga raised a hand, or what passed for a hand in its twisted form, and beckoned to me. Its mouth opened and I heard its voice not with my ears but in the depths of my mind. "It's time to come home, Jake. Time to rejoin the dance." I ran, again. But I know now that it's futile. They'll always find me. Always. So I'm writing this as a warning. To you, whoever you are, reading these words. The world you think you know, the reality you take for granted, all a thin veneer. Underneath is something vast and dark and hungry. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, if you stumble into the wrong place at the wrong time, that darkness reaches out and pulls you in. If you're planning a trip to Iceland, anywhere really, be careful. Pay attention to the shadows, to the spaces between what you think you see. And if you find a quaint little cabin off the beaten path, with a view of a pristine lake and the promise of northern lights dancing in the sky, run, run, and don't look back. Because the hidden people are always watching, always waiting, and once you've caught their attention, once you've become part of their cosmic dance, there's no escaping. Not really. As for me, I don't know how much longer I can keep running, how much longer I can resist their call. Part of me, a growing part, wants to give in. To let go of this mundane reality and embrace the terrifying wonders they offer. Be reunited with Olga, or whatever Olga has become, in the shadowy realms beyond our world. Maybe that's what'll happen. Maybe one day soon, I'll vanish without a trace, swallowed up by the spaces between realities. Or maybe I'll find a way to truly banish them, to seal the breach between worlds once and for all. But I doubt it. Some dances once begun, never truly end. They just go on, echoing through the vast, uncaring cosmos for all eternity. So if you see a tall, thin figure out of the corner of your eye, moving in ways that should be impossible, you hear whispers in a language that makes your brain itch, you feel the weight of ancient, hungry gazes upon you, Remember my story. Remember what happened to Olga and me in that cabin by Vitarvat. And whatever you do, don't answer when they call your name, as they will call. They're calling me right now as I write these final words, calling me home to the dance of shadows. And God help me, I think I'm finally ready to answer.